Okay, a very good morning to all the participants of this webinar. My name is Wilfred Sigler. I head the sales and marketing for CRIF in India. And I welcome you all to this CRIF panel discussions on microfinance industry in the light of the CRIF Microlend report. I will be moderating the session for you today, and we have our four panelists, each stalwarts in the industry, and we will have the panel discussion for around 40 minutes. The last 10 minutes, we keep it for some Q&A for our audience to put in. Everyone would be able to see the chat box on their window. All questions should be put on that chat box, and then I can take it up to the panelists as and when those questions come up during the Q&A. I request people to put in their questions during the discussions itself and not wait only for the last 10 minutes so that we can utilize the last 10 minutes efficiently. Now, quickly, I will introduce the panel for today. We have four panelists, and to start off with, in alphabetical order, Mr. Ajay Kanwal. So Ajay is with Jana Small Finance Bank as the Chief Executive Officer. He's a veteran consumer and commercial banker with 28 years of experience in the industry. And prior to Jana, Ajay was the regional CEO of ASEAN and South Asia for Standard Chartered Bank, as well as a short stint as senior advisor at TPG and MasterCard. He began his career with Citibank, has held various leadership positions throughout his banking career, including CEO of Taiwan, regional CEO of Northeast Asia, and regional head of consumer banking for Southeast Asia. Ajay has served on the board of several companies, including as chairman of the board of Standard Chartered Singapore, director of Standard Chartered in China, and Standard Chartered Korea, and the commissioner of PT Bank, Permata, among others. So we welcome you, Ajay, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Our second panelist, Mr. Manoj Nambiar. Manoj is currently with the Avishkar Group as the managing director of Arohan Financial Services. He has over 30 years of industry experience. Prior to joining Arohan, he has worked with renowned companies in the BFSI segment that include IntelliCash, Ali United Bank, ACIT, National Bank of Oman, ABN AMRO, ANZ Grindlays, GE Countrywide, and Modi Xerox. A mechanical engineer by graduation from VJTI and an MBA in marketing from JBIMS, he has also completed the Strategic Leadership in Microfinance course from Harvard Business School, Boston, and Strategy Meets Leadership course from INSEAD, France. He is the director on the boards of Arohan, Avishkar, and TribeTech, member of the Group Executive Council at IntelliCap, member of the credit committees at IntelliGrow, and is the current chair of the governing board of MFIN. Thank you for your time, Manoj, and welcome on this panel. Our third panelist, Mr. Nitin Chugh. Nitin is the managing director and the chief executive officer of Ujjivan Small Finance Bank. He's a career banker with over 25 years of experience. Before joining Ujjivan, he has had successful stints with HDFC Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, HCL, HP, and Modi Xerox. He holds a bachelor degree in technology from Kurukshetra University and a professional diploma in marketing management from All India Management Association. Welcome, Nitin. Thank you for joining in. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Naveen Chandani. Naveen is the managing director and the chief executive officer at CRIF Highmark. He is responsible for managing the overall operations of the company. Naveen has an experience of 23 years as an eminent business developer. Prior to joining CRIF, Naveen has worked with noteworthy names in the BFSI segment that includes Bank Bazaar, American Express, Visa, Experian, and Dun & Bradstreet. Having pursued a master's degree in international business from Symbiosis International University, he also specializes in enterprise management. Thank you, Naveen. Welcome on the panel. So I'll just take this discussion forward. We know the microfinance industry has been almost a decade since the AP crisis and the Microfinance Bureau coming up as we see it today. During this period, the industry has seen a lots of ups and downs, be it all the floods in various geographies, the tsunami, some demonetization effect, and currently the COVID crisis. But one thing that we have seen that this industry has always bounced back, and that is proven from the fact that it is 15 times of itself from where it started, as we speak today. So CRIF published the Microlend report in the last month, and I will just take some experts from those particular report, and then we will open up for discussion. So as of March, the outstanding book for the microfinance industry was around 2.3 lakh crores. That was a growth of almost 23% over the last year. And if I talk about a quarter-on-quarter growth, it was close to around 9%. Banks have been leading the share right now with around 40%. NBFC MFI is coming in with around 31%, and SFBs close to around 19%. We've also seen ticket size increases. So the average ticket size, as per the report, was around 34,000, and that was a 10% increase over the last year. Interestingly, in the last week of March, there was less than 1 lakh loan that were disbursed because of the lockdown. And in a normal scenario, the same period last year in 2019, the last week of March saw around 25 lakh loans that were disbursed. So this last week of March used to be around 45% of the March volume. But in 2020, it was only 1.75%. The top states, so Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and Bihar, as all of us know, have maintained their position as the top states, with East overall leading the share of the market, and around 10 states making up for almost 83% of the national portfolio. Now, some synopsis that we had taken over the first 2 months of the current financial year, which is April and May. And here, as we said, that only 1 lakh loans that were disbursed in the last week of March, only 1 lakh loan were disbursed in the first 2 months of this financial year, which is April and May. So that's an average of around 50,000 loans per month, which in earlier scenario used to be around 50 lakh loans per month in the earlier financial year. Again, if I just talk about the volumes part of it, so around 213 crores were disbursed in the first 2 months. In the first month, and normally the average is around 17,000 crores for disbursals. Now, given this fact, and given the way the industry has been shaping up with the growth that has been seen in June and July, some bits of reconciliation has happened, some bit of growth has come back. Unlock 1, 2, 3 has already happened. I would want to know that from this panel, where do you see the growth drivers being now after the COVID scenario? So what would be the main drivers of growth? And I would go straight to Nitin first. If you can throw some light on what in your mind would be the drivers of growth now in the post-COVID scenario.
Thank you, Wilfred. See, I think first we need to analyze the situation that we are going through right now, and that will mostly determine the growth drivers. In addition to whatever we will see happening at a macro level, the first one, according to us, is that we need to be able to find ways of living with COVID till such time that everybody gets vaccinated. So that's coming out rather clearly that increasingly companies, banks, all kinds of participants are getting used to functioning or getting back into normal ways of functioning with COVID, right? How do we make adjustments to our working models? So that's the first one that's going to really determine that how quickly we do that and how suitably we do that given the conditions in the market, especially since the scare on the healthcare side is not going to go away, at least till the vaccine comes about. The second one is going to be the changed behavior of customers, because even after the vaccine comes around, I think some of the habits that we have, started getting used to during this time are unlikely to go away. People would most likely prefer remote interactions. People are most likely going to be asking for, interactions and transactions which they can do on their own. So that would necessarily take us into the whole realm of contactless and remote sort of operations, which in some sense can question the traditional models of microfinance. But even if it doesn't, it is quite likely that a large chunk of our customers will want to operate and transact with the banks and the MFIs very differently. The third thing is that all the steps that are being taken in terms of whether from a technology point of view or from a regulatory point of view in terms of the liquidity infusion, or let's say the measures that will be put in place to make sure that the demand for credit also is brought back in a healthy manner. Those things will also define a lot of components of the market to probably come to a point where we will have very serious players left in the market. Okay, because we've also seen, especially in the microfinance industry, we've seen this over the years, and since you mentioned that we've gone through several of these episodes and crises, we've also seen that it's also a business that attracts a lot of people. I mean, we've more recently seen even State Bank of India making a very strong push for entering or re-entering microfinance business. So it does mean that it is a good business to be in. It is a good category of customers that people want to serve, and therefore it logically attracts a lot of participants in the market. And we've also seen in the past, whether it was the Andhra crisis or the demonetization led issues, that sometimes we have people who don't necessarily follow the practices that are in line with the best standards that we need to follow, especially from a customer protection and the way we interact with customers. And that would mean that during this time, a lot of people who are probably not here for the long term, don't have a very long term vision of being in this industry and serving these customers, will most likely find their way out. So this market will also remain only for people who have invested, people who have invested in technology, who are taking all the regulatory interventions very seriously and have a long runway and a roadmap ahead of them. And I would think that maybe it also opens up some kind of a path for consolidation in the industry. So just these three things is the top three I would say.
Perfect. I think that's some interesting points you brought out, and the factor of the consolidation and only the serious players remaining in the industry is something which we should be looking at, given the current scenario and the earlier scenarios that we have seen. So Ajay, I would want your views on this in terms of what growth drivers would be, and maybe throw some light also in your view on what Nitin just mentioned about the consolidation.
Yeah, thanks, Wilfred. I think just a few things. One is at the bottom end of the pyramid, the challenge always has been lack of credit. And I think with COVID, that demand doesn't go away. I think it only becomes bigger. While we may not have numbers right now, I suspect the COVID crisis will probably make the rich and poor divide even more starker. So one of the things that we should remember is that from a growth perspective, pretty much growth is what it used to be, can be bigger in my mind. So that's a given. I think to Nitin's point, I think it probably will, the most positive feature of this whole crisis really is we will move towards more digital approaches, both customers and banks and finance companies, which in a way will help a bit more of formalization, and hence ability to give more credit to the underserved will become easier. So I think the big two bucket we should remember is for small finance banks or large microfinance companies which Manoj manages, growth is less of an issue. There is a large underserved population. I think COVID makes it probably a bigger opportunity for growth, so to say, because there is obviously 6 months of pent up demand. There is people wanting to start their businesses. People have consumption needs they've been postponing. So to me, that is less of growth is not really the worry. I think the thing that we should really think about what happens on a post-COVID moment. And I think to that extent, certainly digitalization will be a reality. I think all banks and microfinance companies and NBFCs who are in the same business have to make sure that we understand what will be the drivers of growth. Will it be the existing customer? Because the existing customer has been a very solid pillar of growth in the regular months. How much do you want to extend given on each person's financial position? So I think there'll be a work around existing customer and how do you see him in the next 12 to 18 months. We'll of course be fully supportive, but I guess that'll be a area of how much do you really want to give him at this point of time? How much does he really need? Do you want to give a second bucket next year? So I think we'll have to really manage our credit with a clear, open understanding that there is a bit of a rupture in the balance sheet, and we need to see how that gets repaired as we improve your risk exposures. On consolidation, I think the point Nitin has made is fair. It probably is the moment where more people will think of consolidation, and rightly so, because having scale, having capital, having management depth does make a difference. And clearly, I think there will be a lot of conversations around it. We will see as that goes. Uh, those would be my quick takes. Yeah.
Thanks, Ajay. Manoj, your quick view on this.
No, I think both Nitin and Ajay have covered some key points. Let me just add to that by saying that the BOP has always been very resilient in terms of coming out of a crisis, right? We've seen that in the AP issue. We've seen that in the various natural calamities which keep happening on a yearly basis across the country. We've seen it in demonetization, right? I think the key thing which sort of typifies them is the fact that they are people who believe they have to manage their lives on their own, right? Even after Cyclone Amphan in West Bengal and Odisha, just about about 2-3 months back, within just about a week to 10 days, right, people were up and running. So they're not people who are waiting for some government largesse to come or some charity organizations to come and help them. They know that they have to manage their lives on their own. One. Second is, I think there is increasing realization of the fact that the formal credit line, and you would be surprised to know, Wilfred, that in India, when NABARD and Fintex did a study about 2 years back, right, they found that while 42.4% Indians, adult Indians, had borrowed, only 8% from that had actually borrowed from a formal registered institution. It essentially means that the RBI, which is the regulator, and institutions which are regulated by the RBI, which is sought to be the formal credit providers, have only reached 8%. Right? The rest have managed through friends and relatives, local money lenders, private finance companies. And I think the realization now is very clearly there that if you're borrowing from, let's say, an NBFC MFI, which were the category of institutions which were created post the AP crisis, right? You're probably borrowing anywhere from 19 to 22, 23% reducing balance, right? Which essentially, I mean, this is the way I explain it to people who don't sort of know the background. You're probably paying 10 to 11 rupees as interest for a 100 rupee loan for a year, right? As compared to that same amount of money being paid per month to a private financer or a money lender. So the customer today also knows that if I play around with my credit line, I will lose this line, which is coming to me at 1/10 or 1/12 the cost. And I will have no other option but to go to those people who are going to charge me 10 to 12 times more, right? So that's the second point. The third point is, in a country where still we talk about the 230 or 240,000 crores, depending on whether you're looking at March or June or July, all the supply is still talking about 30% of the supply being serviced, right? So when you have anywhere from the 50 to 60 or 70% still yet to be touched, right, you can understand that market is really not the issue. It's about, if you ask me today, while the BOP limps back to normalcy after the serious lockdowns that we've gone through and still manages through the localized lockdowns which are happening, people have pretty much used up their household savings. So they have no other option but to actually talk to people like us or go back to their lenders and talk about a sort of credit line. In fact, we were discussing with the RBI governor some time back, and I was telling him that we have estimated the demand for emergency loans of just 5,000, 7,500, 10,000 rupee loans to existing regular customers, right, to be of the order of more than 10,000 crores. Right, 60 million clients essentially is what we service today across the largest sector, right? The 240,000 crores that you mentioned. Even if you take 2/3 of that as people who would need anywhere from 5 to 7,500 to 10,000 rupees, you're talking about nothing less than 10,000 crores. So, like Ajay said, the demand for credit is actually going to spike. The question really is that how does the liquidity measures, how does the credit discipline that we've created, how does the distribution that we've created across these different institutions, how do they serve the customer and a customer who takes the credit line seriously? because we have to eliminate the inefficiencies from the system. Otherwise, the pricing essentially would keep going up, right, to handle the, in terms of the losses which will actually come up. Technology, right, KYC, different types of institutions being available, the outreach, the number of employees who work in the sector, which is more than 1 lakh today, the 30-40,000 branches across the different institutions which are there today. All of them help to serve the 60 million customers. And don't forget, of the 60 million customers, even if you take 4 to 5 members per family, you're talking about 300 million Indians being impacted through the work that we do in the sector. That point is today not lost on the RBI or the or the government of India.
So that's a good point you're making, Manoj. And I will actually have a particular question around this particular thing after I hear from Naveen. So Naveen, you're running a credit bureau today. You are having meetings across various type of clients, so not necessarily only the microfinance segment, but even on the consumer side as well as on SME lending. What do you see to be the drivers for this sector and otherwise overall from the industry standpoint as far as lending is concerned?
Thanks, Wilfred. And as the three esteemed panelists shared, I think India is a very credit hungry country. I think that goes without saying. The opportunity is large, irrespective of COVID or not COVID, right? That's a huge market. Uh, Talking about the industry, the financial service industry, the lending industry itself, I think the panelists touched upon technology and digital. I think everyone, may it be a bank, either a universal bank, a small finance bank, or an NBFC, either focusing on microfinance or even in the urban sector, everyone is looking at 2.0, if I may. How can it be an end-to-end digital journey? Also with I think the migrant labor going back to their villages, smartphone penetration, the use of video KYC that has come in. I think all these are going to define how frictionless and presence-less I think finance is going to be there. However, in this period of growth, I think what I've heard from leaders is that existing customers, empathy towards them, building trust with them. We heard emergency loans, top-up loans. So I think that is coming in, and analytics is playing a very, very important role in that. Which of my customers I could extend that emergency or top-up loan? How can I understand which customers I could actually move sometimes from just an kind of a joint borrowing an MFI to an MFI plus segment. I think in MFI there is this MFI plus segment that is coming up, which is somebody ready to take an individual loan, because rebooting and restarting is going to be required. MSME or street vendors are also being seen as important credit borrowers. So I think a lot is happening, Wilfred. I would say most important is in everybody's mind, how will I retain my existing customer? How can I make this completely digital, both from a lender perspective and also the awareness and convincing the borrowers slowly but steadily into getting into this digital ecosystem.
Okay. Thanks, Naveen. Now, so we heard that demand is going to be there. There will be a spike in after the COVID era. We also heard that people will be looking at more contactless or remote engagement if possible. Now, in this kind of a scenario, while we're talking about digital, but as far as the JLG lending is concerned, the group formation, group discussions, and the group meetings are a very integral part of the lending process. So are there any steps that have been taken, or maybe you have already done something, or something which the industry needs from the other technology players or fintech players to ensure that the digitization happens, sooner than later. And I would let Ajay just, if you can throw some light on this, of how, what does it take to digitize the entire process today, which is very human centric. I mean, very contact centric.
So I think a couple of things. One is the whole loan processing piece is very digitized, and I think most large microfinance companies or small finance banks, I mean, they are literally mini fintechs in themselves. So I think digitization of the loan processing is pretty much in place. I think the question is, we have two parts which are not digitized. One is the whole sales process is not digitized because there's very little bureau data available or very little information about the customer. And second is the collection process is not digitized because that's where the challenges around, obviously all our customers, or rather most of our customers, deal with cash, maintain cash. The banks are far away, they're not used to banking habits. With the wallets, there has been obviously a positive change to that, but still it's a very small proportion. Now, between the two legs of, the relationship piece of sourcing him, I think there is little, I would suspect, certainly I would speak for Jana, we are not going to try and break that model, because for the next few months, our primary focus will be on making sure we get back on track to the same rhythm that we were in pre-COVID, so that we get the credit piece right. So I think innovating on a key piece of relationship using a digital method is unlikely in the next many months. And I say that purely from one simple perspective, because right now where we are, our first bias is to stabilize the customer and our own numbers, make sure we get back on even keel, and then certainly take the step on innovation, which may be a bit more, we can certainly pilot something, but I think anything big is not going to be the first bias. What we can work harder really is to get customers to use formal mechanism of saving money and transacting money. And that is where the collection role does play a role. We've got superb help from NPCI to get a QR based answer around collections. We certainly have a UPI based answer around collections. Our incentives now are really based with customers and staff to push digital. We are seeing a move about 10 to 15% of money coming through digital, which is a big change than it was on a pre-COVID basis. And I think these are good steps toward the right direction. I think a lot of thoughts in our minds of how do we digitize the whole piece, but frankly, I think it'll be a pilot, it'll be a test. It won't be a big move toward digital straight off from post-COVID. I think post-COVID, the first step would be stabilize operations, get the relationship back, make sure they have the money, like Manoj says, make sure they get the emergency loans, and there's normalization. I think post that, I think we will be a bit more, try and be more transformational, so to say.
Sure. Okay. So Nitin, so as far as digitization was concerned, we also heard Ajay talk about on the collection side. So in terms of more cashless repayments, now the disbursements have become more and more cashless. I mean, almost more than 90% odd is disbursed cashless. What about the repayment part and how Ujjivan has worked a little bit about the digitization of the repayment system, or making it more cashless, I would say?
So there are two ways of looking at cashless and digital, and cashless and digital is not exactly the same. So we can argue about that. But I think the more theme is about providing alternatives. How many alternatives can be provided to customers? So the way we've looked at it is that we need to provide with alternate ways of collecting, alternate ways to customers to make those repayments. So one is to expand the whole available options, whether through wallets or any other tie-ups. So we are trying to do that, trying to be trying to be able to use a BBPS platform, for example, which will give us access to many other apps and not just a few wallets that we deal with right now. The second part is also an alternate arrangement that we are now scaling up. So we had piloted with Airtel Payments Bank, their collection points. I mean, their points being used as collection points, and they are in close proximity to our customers. So we are rolling that out, one branch at a time, and enabling points which are around that branch, a few at a time, and that has really helped us. So if you combine the alternate ways of collecting, I think we very clearly moved from roughly 16% of the alternate ways of collecting, which you can call digital or cashless, in the month of June to nearly 37% in the month of July. So nearly 37% of our collections came through the non-traditional ways of our people going and collecting or customers coming and depositing. Now that gives us the confidence that yes, this model can be made to work by just giving alternatives. It doesn't have to be only based on a digital interface. That can happen over a period of time, and that will require a lot of education, that will require a lot of training for users, that will require very different kinds of interfaces, and most importantly, like Ajay said, the habit of using the bank account itself has to be brought about. And we must also understand that if our customers earn in cash, they will also burn in cash, right? So it's very impractical asking a customer that you earned in cash, now come and deposit that money in the bank account and then use the bank account to make that payment. Right? It's counterproductive. But the way we are going about it is that save a day's trip to the branch if you have to come to the branch. Or let's say to our own people, we are saying that, okay, you made the effort of going and collecting whether door to door or through the center meeting. We will spare that time. We will use that bandwidth to serve our customers better. And, that will hopefully free up a lot of efficiency for us. Okay. But the user behavior will take some time to change. It has taken time for even the middle class and the affluent to change. It doesn't happen suddenly. And I also completely agree with Ajay on the question that you asked on the center meeting model. So that's not, I don't think there is any rush to break that model and say that, okay, that model doesn't need to work. But if the customer behavior suggests, which is what we are realizing in a lot of our centers now, that customers are unwilling to come to center meetings. We saw this happen in the metros in the early years, where people don't turn up for center meetings, only for the fact that they don't have the time. Now it's a different consideration also that they don't want to gather in groups, right? So we have to give them alternatives. And if we have to give them alternatives, it has to be a viable alternative. It has to be a scalable alternative. And that is the view we have, that we give as many options to our customers to choose what works for them, and then use this time to also educate and train them. And that can take its usual time. We've taken almost 10 years to educate the middle class to, be completely self-serve. So we can't expect that magic to happen within a year's time, with the microfinance category of customers. We have to give it the time that it needs.
Sure. Thank you, Nitin. Manoj, when we were discussing, you had also mentioned a term which I really noted at that point in time, which was a controlled September. So with now the moratorium ending, and I have two questions into this one. One is, during the pandemic, let's say, what has Aarohan or MFin for that matter, overall, how have you prepared, or what are the steps you've taken to prepare yourself during the pandemic for something which is going to come after? That is one. And the second part was, now with the moratorium ending, what are the kind of things that people would need to be very wary about in terms of the way we're doing things as far as sourcing as well as collection? Both are concerned.
Yeah. A good question, Wilfred. And see, on the preparation side, I think when the lockdown got announced somewhere around the 25th of March, and I keep telling everybody in the sector that what an uneventful year ending we had last year, right? Typically, the last week, 10 days are the most hectic activity period, and you literally are disbursing tons of money on a day-to-day basis. So all of us obviously reported far more muted numbers for the year ending March 20 than what we would have otherwise. So a lot of the places, the localized section 144s and all that had started by mid of the month in March itself. So with the RBI coming out with the moratorium, the first priority for us as a sector was to ensure that the communication on the moratorium was actually done to all the customers in a very simple manner which they could understand. And you also need to appreciate that moratorium has got announced in two phases. So first it was the March, April, May period, right? Of which March was already over by the time the moratorium got announced on the 25th of March. So, and almost 70-80% collections for the month had already been completed. So it was essentially April and May, which was much easier because anyway, April till the 20th, 25th of April was a complete lockdown. So there was no question of any sort of physical meeting or actually communication. The challenge was more in terms of the next extension which happened from the 1st of June till the end of August. And as we discussed, August is the last month where there is the moratorium. So in phase one, even a customer who was taking the full moratorium essentially was taking it only for April and May. And to that extent, the impact on whatever the interest charges would be limited. But imagine a situation if a customer is not paid, let's say from March till August, the accrued interest on the loan amount, right, at the same rate at which he or she is taken a loan, would be a significant amount of money at the end of August, which would get reflected on their account on the 1st of September. So the first priority for us as a sector was to explain the moratorium very clearly. And I would say that we've really taken on, or at least sought to take on the role of a financial advisor to the client to say, while the moratorium is available, please use it only to the extent that you need it. If your activity has got completely stopped or you're not in a position to actually pay, right, take it for a month, take it maybe for 2 months, but anything more than that would mean a significant hit as far as the costing of that is concerned. Your tenure gets extended, your accrued interest comes in, you probably also need to pay for additional insurance because the old tenure is what you paid the insurance for. So all in all, also understand that every month there is an X number of customers whose loans are coming to an end. So why would a customer who's paying the last installment in March or April, let's say, take a moratorium? The customer would want to pay that last payment and then apply for a new loan, right? So even from a natural perspective, there is an X number of customers who would prefer to pay and then take a new loan rather than sort of take the moratorium. So I think the focus has been primarily in terms of explaining, and certainly I would say this time both the media and the local activism, I would say, has been far lesser compared to what we had to go through during demonetization. So I guess the overall lockdown process or the sensitivity, right, has been far higher. So we've had cases, but not to the extent of what could have been sort of damaging to the sector. So there have been local issues about why are you still collecting while there is moratorium, and we've explained to say there's no force, but it's our duty to go and meet the customer and explain to her. If she has the liquidity, she pays. You also remember that our type of customer, what has really helped is, one, the primary, I would say, microfinance portfolio is more in the semi-urban and the rural areas, right? There are obviously some of us who are also urban focused, but over a period of time, at least the NBFC MFIs, I would say, have moved on to semi-urban and the rural areas. The lockdown impact there has been considerably lesser than what has happened in the urban sector. One. Second, most of our customers do have an agri connection. With a bumper harvest which happened in April and a good sowing which has happened, we expect that same momentum to again happen in September, October when the harvest season again comes. So the household has had some cash flow to be able to pay rather than take the full period as a moratorium. So to that extent, I would say that within the MFI community, from literally single digit collections in the month of April, because we hardly had about a week when we opened up, to about 75%, which is what the sector, I think, has averaged end of July. It's been a steady improvement, right? And August, we all are hoping that we hit a much better number so that, like you said, the seamless transition into September, right, where the clock starts again. The clock is now stopped from 1st of March, right? So that clock restarting again on the 1st of September is what all of us are preparing for. But I would say customers, while some of them have had issues, and I'm not denying the fact that there is an impact at the bottom of the pyramid. People are now slowly coming back. Their economic activity levels have not certainly reached the kind of levels which were there pre-February. But the fact that 70-75% collections have been achieved last month, and even within that, let me tell you, there are geographies which have recorded 85-90%, and there are geographies which have done less than 50% also, right? So that shows you the diversification which is there in the sector, and the fact that customers understand after our explanation to say better to avail of moratorium as less as possible, only if you require it. Otherwise, keep the account alive, keep the account active, so that everything doesn't hit you then on the 1st of September.
On the 1st of September. Understood. Keeping the time in mind, quickly I'll go to Naveen. Naveen, what has CRIF done? I mean, we've heard a lot of these needs coming up now, but is there any anticipation of those needs that may come up, and has CRIF done anything about getting ready to address those particular needs from clients?
Thanks, Wilfred, for the question. So in fact, I have had conversations with these panelists and obviously the rest of our clients. And specifically what was on their mind was always that, hey, how is the repayment going to happen? I think the first, when the moratorium came in is that, okay, after the moratorium, how are we going to be prepared? How are we going to follow up? How are we going to know that, these guys are ready to pay? So I think analytics plays a very, very big role. So during the lockdown period, we reached out to all our financial institution partners and started working with them. Obviously, there was collection scorecards which were there, which was mainly to give them insights on how their portfolio is, early warnings, recovery scores, all that we did. But we came up with something very unique, which was collection benchmarking, comparing them with their peers and the industry. I think that has helped because to know if your customer is not paying you, even if it's moratorium, but paying somebody else, was a good insight to have. Um, Over and above this, I think it was more about seeing if the collection workflow, uh, who to prioritize, what the dialer should do, who to be in touch with. If there is a requirement, should that individual be given that emergency or top up loan? So the conversation was more being in touch with the customer, knowing who can pay, who can be given a top up, who can be given a emergency loan, at the same time benchmarking yourself with the peer set. The workflow was important, creating these scorecards, rehashing scorecards if required, and putting it on top of the brain of, I would say, the decision engine, which is the brain of any lending organization, how these multiple scorecards play. So I think during lockdown, we did a lot of work around collection and upsell and cross-sell, Wilfred.
Okay. Thanks, Naveen. Quickly, just on one bit on the product side. Now, in the post-COVID times, we spoke about the ticket size increasing from where it started, and currently it's at 34,000 odd. The average exposure to customer is around 39,000 as per the report. Now, is there a need for the product itself to undergo a change? Maybe looking at a revision of the loan cycle, or maybe looking at maybe a slightly larger tenure so as to give a larger ticket to a particular customer, or even a line underwriting. So giving a line to the customer, but the usage can happen within that line. Is there something like that which is required? So Nitin, I would want your views on that, and then I would come to Ajay on this.
Like many other things, Wilfred, I don't think we need to do this all together and in one shot for everybody, because these changes happen based on the segmentation of customers. And Naveen would agree from an analytics point of view that you can create, as micro segments as you can in the overall portfolio. So like the model for individual loans is really a graduation score for group lending customers, and they move to individual loans. Yes, there could be a new to credit customer also who straight away comes into the individual loan category. But logically enough, I think the group lending customers also, as their income levels progress, the ticket sizes of the loans will also go up. As of now, for customers who come in as new to credit, I think there is all likelihood that the ticket sizes are going to be smaller, like with any other segment, and microfinance is no exception to that. But for people who have been there, have been there for a long enough time, and there is enough and more data and analytics available for them, I think it's only logical that some of these segments now start to break out, and that is what we hear from customers also, that they also want to break out of the group lending model into individual loans. And that is how I think in our case, at least 20% of our monthly origination pre-COVID was individual loans, and I don't see a reason why that would be any lower even after COVID. So it's a logical progression, but changes to the product or to the cycle, I would think is largely to do with the segment of customers and not as a blanket thing that we need to do in the entire industry.
Thanks, Nitin. Ajay, your views on this?
So, my thought is like doing larger amounts for longer tenors on an unsecured basis, where you do not have financials which are, formalized, may not be the right approach, honestly. Uh, Frankly, staying in the arena where you are right now is better. And frankly, being a bit more conservative for the next 6 to 12 months, as you really understand the impact of what really has happened to various customers, may be the right answer. So if you ask me, really, more conservatism as we get out of the crisis may be the right answer, which is smaller loans to a lot more people rather than doing bigger tenors or bigger amounts. So that would be my first way of like responding to your question. I think second thing what will change really is, it's not about product size and loan size. It's about, I think, the need of the customer. I think in our business now, clearly the need for insurance has gone up. Everybody is talking about the need for insurance, which would have not been a normal conversation with our customers pre-COVID, and certainly health insurance. So I think there is a work for us to do, which is to create this opportunity for customers to go beyond just treating us as a lending institution, and that when I say us, I mean all financial institutions. So I think that is the second piece which will come in, which is new needs coming in. I think the third, and just on the needs and loan amount and tenors. So let's say there is a clear, certainly in the urban areas, a lot of interest of online learnings and schools being online, etc. So there is a demand for computers. All kids would love it, maybe a tab. So there is an end use product which is coming up, which could very well, like Nitin says, the individual loan could very well be a computer loan next, which none of us would have done with so much earnest in the past. So I think that is what will change, honestly. I think the way the customers are approaching institutions and how we will try and service their needs will change. Over leveraging has never been a good thing for any financial institution, and I certainly think post-COVID would be the bad answer. I would argue for the other end, actually.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Ajay. We heard about the approach, a little bit of conservatism in terms of getting out of the COVID area before getting into something new, something very different. Manoj, the MFIN had come out with the Code of Responsible Lending, and just wanted to throw some light on how is that going in terms of the people who have adopted to that, and post which we will try to take some questions from the audience. Some questions have come up. So just if you can throw some light quickly on that, and we will just take some questions from the audience then.
No, Wilfred, thank you for asking this. I think this is very critical, and I'm happy that all three of us, Ajay, me, and Nitin, all represent companies which are signees and who believe in this very, very strongly, right? And in fact, I'm sure all of us, at least I can say for myself, for the score, our quarter 4 score was actually 99 out of 100, right? So in terms of compliance, what that actually, so I think the first question to all the people are on the sort of on the session today is, whenever you meet a microfinance lender, the first question you should ask is, are you a responsible lender? If you are a responsible lender, you will have the logo, like the Great Place to Work logo, which people sort of show. The second question you should ask is, what is your score? Because with these two questions, essentially, you will get to know what is the level of responsibility which is there on the other side. And this is an industry-wide sort of initiative, Wilfred, and I'm happy to tell you that I think it's a global first for an initiative of this size. We have 110 signees to the Code for Responsible Lending, which was launched by Dr. Mohammed Yunus about a year back, last year. And in fact, not only the for-profit, but even the not-for-profit sector has now been included. We have a steering committee which has representation from all the 4-5 types of lenders: banks, non-banks, within banks, universal banks, small finance banks, within the non-banks, NBFCs, NBFC, MFIs, and also the not-for-profit sector, right? And we have a steering committee which is headed by Ishar Khan, who's the ex-DG of the RBI. And starting with just 4 points, very simple points that we started last year on, which is not more than 3 lenders to a client, not more than 1.25 lakh outstanding, no lending without an updated credit bureau report, and no lending to an NPA client, right? We have moved on this year. We plan to add 2 more measures. One is the fact that how do you move to a 360-degree bureau report rather than just looking at the outstanding of the lady to whom you're actually giving the loan, so that you have a household view, including what loans the husband has taken, what is the overall obligation of the house, rather than just looking at a sort of semi view which is there. Second is the employee bureau, right? We are also very, very particular that lakhs of employees which work in the sector, 85-90% of them are field staff, and we've had very, very difficult situations being encountered where the same employee who does the fraud in one company quietly goes to the other company and claims that he's a fresher, and then the whole cycle continues, right? So as I mentioned earlier also, I think cleaning up the system of customers who actually don't take the credit bureau record seriously, right? Cleaning them from employees who are here to make a quick buck, right? Because the larger vision is that of providing access to finance, right, to the BOP. So I would say CRL is a very, very key initiative, and please do track it in terms of the signees, the adherence, and I would say even on an overall basis, the average adherence is at least 80% plus, right? Which we are working towards making it 90 plus and 95% plus.
Sure.
In
Thanks,
fact, I
Manoj.
may come in over here, Wilfred.
I was actually going to come in to you, Naveen, because Manoj mentioned it. So please go ahead. Go ahead.
Correct. So, I've been working with everyone on the panel and also the rest of, the leaders in this segment. And I think this comprehensive view which Manoj spoke about is really crucial. And in fact, even Ajay spoke about, that laptop or a desktop, maybe a child somewhere in a village requires because of education. Ajay, said that individual loan, even, segments that Nitin spoke about could be individual loans. So this overlap between MFI and individuals is between 20 to 25% approximately. And this overlap, if you give a comprehensive view, even at the time of dispersing a loan on the MFI base, you can actually catch if there is a default in the other bureau. And that is something that we have seen, of this overlap. Even before the loan is dispersed, there are cases in certain institutions up to 30% that they have defaulted in the other bureau. So I think that was important. And even Manoj spoke about the holistic view of that household. So again, it's all data, it's all analytics, putting it together, creating a holistic scorecard, and then knowing, who is the right person. This employee verification one, again, it's a very new initiative, and there is room for collaboration across different parties. Ajay spoke about insurance. Again, there is a lot of collaboration that the financial service sector itself can look at helping each other to actually navigate through this current scenario.
Sure. So I'll just pick up one or two questions that are coming in from the audience. I think right now, since one question which has come in is most of the MFIs are raising debt money from the banks. And with the banks being focused on cash conservation, how will the anticipated desired growth continue for the smaller MFIs? And Manoj, I would want your view on that. And Nitin and Ajay, feel free to comment on this question if required.
Yeah, Nitin and Ajay can respond as to how they would lend to this
Lend to-
MFI. and there's some new development which I'm sure both of them can talk about. But Wilfred, let me be frank that both the RBI and the Government of India initiatives have certainly helped, right? At least for the medium plus kind of size of companies. The TLTRO, the refinance program has been extremely successful. Definitely, the refinance program has been far more, given the fact that both SIDBI and NABARD were the channelizing agencies for us. And in quarter one, pretty much the liquidity came from those two initiatives, right? In quarter two, I would say the Government of India scheme in terms of the partial, sort of credit guarantee scheme has certainly helped companies which have had good PSU bank relationships. Unfortunately, the PCG scheme is only being run through the PSU banks. So companies like us, which have had good sort of relationships with PSU banks, have certainly sort of benefited. The larger challenge is, I would say, the small and medium counterparts of us in the MFIN sector, and I would say there 2-3 things we have tried. One is, of course, the NABARD initiative, which I'm sure Nitin will speak about. Also, the fact that some of the larger NBFC MFIs like us have actually been given additional liquidity by people like NABARD with an intention to ensure that that money is actually given down the line. Right, so a lot of them essentially are depending on the larger MFIs like us. In fact, the latest RBI announcement, which has happened, has carved out 5,000 crores, which has been given to NABARD, where the money is intended for less than 500 crore NBFCs and NBFC MFIs. So the RBI, because we have been continuously talking about it and representing to them, are aware of that particular issue, which is the reason why a lot of measures, including carving out in the TLTRO, the refinance program, I'm now telling you that less than 500 crores NBFCs and NBFC MFIs are the ones to be sort of given the liquidity. right? So a lot of things are happening. Certainly the very small ones where their capital adequacy ratios on the edge, or your net worth numbers are actually smaller, your ratings are not really up to the mark in terms of what you can. And at different points of time, there would be different companies, right? Somebody has just started, somebody is 1 year, 2 years in the game, somebody was just about trying to raise capital before the crisis impacted. So you will have different situations which need to be handled on a case-to-case basis.
So Nitin, any views on this?
Yeah, so I just want to update on the recent development that we've signed up with NABARD and Vivriti. I think that was also a press release made by NABARD. So I mean, we've been associated with MFIs for a very long time, considering that we were an MFI ourselves. So we really value and, we have our heart in the sector. And even during the whole moratorium period, I think we have done our best in terms of extending the moratorium. Yes, I do agree that we may not have been able to give it to everybody, but to the best extent possible, wherever it was feasible and viable. I think we've done that. And more recently, this whole program that NABARD will run, along with Vivriti and us, should also be of good use to a lot of MFI. So I think we are totally committed to the extent that it is. It meets our set of framework criteria as well.
Thanks, Nitin. Ajay, I saw a big smile on your face when Manoj just started off. So
Yeah.
I would wait for your comments on this.
No, I think 2, 3 things. One is, we ourselves were an MFI, like Nitin mentioned, so we find it very comfortable dealing with small and medium-sized MFIs. My smile was also during this last few months. We've also seen the various MFIs behave in a different way. So it's very easy for us to kind of make out how different MFIs have different kind of characters and behaviors and creditworthiness and responses to difficult times. We have an exposure to small and medium MFIs. We are going to have 2 disbursals in the next 2 days because I think the demand is also coming back. The funny thing in banking is, when you need the money, you don't have it. But nobody needed money in the last few months. People just wanted to make sure if you wanted, you are able to get it. Nobody really wanted it. I think people really want it now, and it's available for like Manoj says, for the names which have done well. I think the bigger issue really will be around capital. And somewhere I think all of us have to put our heads together of certainly helping the small and the medium ones because the market size is so large. Is how do the folks get capital? I think that will be the bigger issue to my mind, less about liquidity. There's enough SFBs around who can support them.
Sure. Thank you. We have now around 3 minutes left for this panel discussion. We wanted to have a slightly longer discussion on this. I think it would have been a great discussion with the kind of topics that we were touching. But let me just take a couple of minutes to just summarize the discussion and then we can end the conversation. So what we heard today was mainly that the need is there. There is going to be a spike in terms of demand. It's a matter of addressing those demands, and addressing those demands may require some bit of movement towards digitization, and those steps are already being taken by most of the players, and there would be some more steps that need to be taken as far as digitization goes, whether it is for onboarding a customer or for collecting from a customer. Now, also we heard that we need to first come back to the same scale as we were earlier before taking something very drastic on your plate. And that has been a need for the sort of a approach towards making smaller changes rather than making very large change as far as process or product is concerned. Also, we heard that the serious players may remain. I mean, there could be a need for consolidation at some point in time, and people who are serious, who can go through such cycles, are the ones who would remain. And it is also important when we talk about digitization of repayments, etc. We are not talking only about digitization, but we are also talking about how we are making it easier for the customers to repay, as Nitin touched upon. Now, with these thoughts in place, I think right now the code for the responsible lending, which has now come in, and we are glad to hear with the number of signees, almost more than 110 odd people there. So there is some bit of check and balances also in place so that the industry itself flourishes. And maybe some parting thoughts from each of you before we end the conversation quickly. And I would start with Naveen. Then we can have the panelists. Just a small parting thought from you.
Right.
Naveen, over to you.
Yeah. So I think it's all going to be about technology, digital, empathy, trust. We spoke about all these, but most importantly, I think uh, giving credit to who needs it most, understanding whether they can actually pay back, doing anything that analytics can bring in for the new to credit. I think that's something which I see collaboration across the industry. So that will be the future.
Sure. Ajay, uh, some last parting
Yeah,
thoughts from you.
sure. I think first I must say the responsible lending code is a crucial one. It not only safeguards the health of the industry, but also all the individual players because they have to adhere to a basic credit discipline, which is frankly a must. And no single entity can guard himself when it is a informal lending environment. So I think that is very crucial. To Naveen's mention on comprehensive bureau, we have been using it ourselves, and I think it's very valuable. So I think the point that Naveen has made really crucial for lenders to be not saving money on bureau checks, but really thinking of what the NPA position can be. I think for us at today's conversations, this is a very crucial one. In fact, post-COVID, serving the underserved becomes even more crucial because helping people get back livelihoods, get back on track, economy to move. Unlikely if you have the large, big bottom end of the pyramid not moving, things will be very unlikely. So I think even bigger role for us. We are very geared to address it. Won't be easy times, uh, but we will need some courage and experience, which I think most of us have, given that we are normally an industry which goes through a crisis every few years. So I think our preparedness is there, but it'll be very interesting times.
Thank you, Ajay. Nitin, if I may request you to have your views on this.
I think just three quick points from me. One is that this is a time for us as an industry to recommit ourselves to what we stand for. And I think that shouldn't go away. We shouldn't lose our purpose and direction just because we're going through a time which is, supposedly difficult. We can argue about that also. The second one is, I think this is also a very good time for people to collaborate, help each other, stand up for each other, because then that is how we will be able to collectively stand for the customers that we want to serve. And the last thing is, I think we have to find ways of getting the better out of the situation rather than the other way around, where this whole COVID crisis or the crisis, if you want to call it a crisis, gets the better of us. I think we still have the wherewithal, the time, and the resources available collectively that we can get the better out of this rather than the other way around.
Thanks, Nitin. Yes, Manoj, your views on this.
Yeah, no, Wilfred, I think both Ajay and sort of Nitin have covered it, but I would just say that a very intense 3 to 6 months ahead, right? We starting right from September onwards, and obviously the industry is bracing up for that spike in delinquency, which will happen. We hope it doesn't, but I'm sure it will, given the fact that the dormancy or the inactivation levels are there. Plus, there is impact at the bottom of the pyramid. So, to that extent, the next 3 to 6 months are going to be very intense for all of us, and our main objective is to ensure that by next March, which is March 21, we sort of come back to where we started the year at, and if possible, actually improve the situation, right? So it's very important from that perspective. The second thing I would say is that, like Naveen said, credit is the foundation on which the lending business works, right? And to that extent, or any initiative which goes towards building the credit culture, credit reporting, credit information being available, is very, very important. For example, you'd be happy to know that most of us today submit data in terms of a daily basis. So imagine the power that if you have a disbursement plan today at 11 o'clock, and at 10:45 you can actually go to the system and check whether this lady that you are disbursing today has actually got some money yesterday, right? Because at the BOP for a 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 rupee loan, once the money goes out, there is nothing really that you can do, You can't have recovery efforts, you can't have legal, so money out of the window is out, right? So while we build from the 30% penetration that we have today towards that desired state of whatever whatever it is, whether it's 60 or 75 or 80%, right? Including sort of credit as a key financial inclusion sort of agenda, building the right credit culture and ensuring that non-serious customers pay for it, right, is very, very important. It's on that foundation that the lending business will always stand tall. And it's a matter of concern for us that a sector which used to report less than 1% delinquency, and I'm talking about PAR 1 day, which means a DPD of 1 day and above, is today almost at 3% plus. Now, obviously, something has gone wrong in the last 2 to 3 years, due to which that number has gone to 3%. And 3% is certainly not a viable sort of delinquency for our, for our sector.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Manoj. So thank you, everyone. I thank all the panelists for taking our time today. And we had some great conversations, and I'm sure, in fact, in my mind also, there are certain more discussion points that are there. And we leave it at that, saying that there may be a chance that we get together some other time to have further discussions on this. Thanks for the great insights, everyone. And the audience, I think, thanks for joining in. In case there are any questions, you can reach out to us at interact@crifhighmark.com, and we will try to answer those questions as much as possible. So with that, we come to the end of the discussion today. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Naveen. Thanks, Ajay. Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, Manoj, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Welcome. Thank you.